Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bassam Haddad, and I am joined here by Omar Dahi and Michael Klare. This is a very timely and important conversation with Professor Michael Klare on the U.S. national security establishment. It is also a video premiere of understanding the U.S. national security state, which we will reveal in just a few moments. Before that, let me just say that this is part of the inaugural set of events for the project under the title US in the Middle East, Past, Present, and Prospects. And it actually goes beyond the Middle East, given the nature of the topic. We will not say very much about the project now, but we will say a lot about the United States national security establishment. In just a moment, we will feature the video, but let me just introduce very quickly my colleague Omar Dahi and Professor Michael Klare. Well, Professor Dahi and Professor Klare. I actually don't do professor or doctors, but so if I don't do it, forgive me. Omar Dahi is a co-editor of Jadaliyya and an associate professor of economics at Hampshire College and co-director of the Peace Building and State Building Program and research associate at the Public Economy Research Institute, University of Massachusetts Amherst. His research interests are in the political economy of development in the Middle East, South Asia, South relations, comparative regionalism, peace and conflict studies, and critical security studies. He has published in academic outlets such as the Journal of Development Economics, Applied Economics, Southern Economic Journal, Political Geography, Middle East Report, Forced Migration Review, and Critical Studies on Security. His last book, South South Trade and Finance in the 21st Century, Rise of the South or a Second Great Divergence, co-authored with Firad Damir, explores the ambiguous developmental impact of the new economic linkages among countries of the global South. You can read the remainder of his bio on the post that is actually already on Jadaliyya. Let me introduce Michael Klare so we can get the introductions out of the way and get right to the substance. Michael Klare, professor College Professor Emeritus of Peace and World Security Studies and Director of the Five College Program in Peace and World Security Studies, PAWSS. He holds a PhD. He holds a BA and MA from Columbia University and a PhD from the Graduate School of the Union Institute. He has written widely on U.S. military policy, international peace and security affairs, the global arms trade, and global resource politics. His books include American Arms Supermarket from 1984, Low Intensity Warfare 1988, Peace and World Security Studies, a Curriculum Guide 1989, World Security Challenges for a New Security 1991. These are the first editions that I'm referring to by year. Rogue States and Nuclear Outlaws 1995, Light Weapons and Civil Conflict 1999, Resource Wars 2001, Blood and Oil 2004, and The Race for What's Left 2012. His articles have appeared in many journals, including Arms Control Today, Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, Current History, Foreign Affairs, Harper's, The Nation, Scientific American, and Technology Review. Professor Klare serves on the board of the Arms Control Association and advises other organizations in the field. Welcome to this conversation, both Omar and Michael. How are you guys?
Good.
Good. Thank you.
I didn't know I wrote so many books, but thank you.
Yes, well, this is actually why we have you, partly in part, why we have you here. And people will also be able to access these volumes also on the post if they would like to purchase or get a copy. I am very excited about this conversation, but now I will turn it to Omar to launch our discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Bassam, so much. It's really great to be here, and I'm very excited about this event for many reasons that I'll mention a few of them, and we'll have a discussion. Let me just say how we imagine this event going. I'm just going to say a few words to introduce the video that we're going to premiere, which was a collaboration with Michael, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. It's a 10-minute video, 10-minute animated video. And after that, we'll talk a little bit more about how the video came about. And then we'll transition to a discussion on US foreign policy that Michael and I and Bassam will have. We have some topics that we thought we could ask Michael about that he's written, among the many, many things that he's written, including books that Bassam didn't even mention. So we'll talk about those and maybe try to make sense of what the foreign policy implications will be of the elections. Of course, there's a lot to talk about, but we couldn't but take advantage of Michael's presence to shed light on that, since, of course, the elections are on everyone's mind. So let me talk a little bit about the video. I won't say too much because we want to get to it very shortly. But I direct a research network called Security in Context, which is, of course, a close partner of the Arab Studies Institute and Jadaliyya, and which is a partner in the initiative that Bassam just mentioned on assessing U.S. policy in the Middle East. But separately, we have been working on this video, which really started as a guest lecture in my class about 2 years ago. So I've taught at Hampshire College for many years, and Michael also taught at Hampshire for many years. He's a professor emeritus right now. And about 2 years ago, I was teaching a class called Global Insecurity, and I invited Michael to give a introduction to my students about the U.S. national security state, and what would he say, kind of given his knowledge and his experience and research about it. What are, how are we to think about the U.S. national security state? What are its components? How does it function? And what are its objectives? And Michael very kindly agreed to come and talk, as he often does in my class. And it was an amazing lecture, very well received. But during the talk, he put on this amazing kind of diagram on the board. And as he was talking, I thought, it would be great if we could share this with the rest of the world, if we could make a video kind of introduction or primer to introduce people to the U.S. national security state. So we talked about it and we decided to go ahead and do it. Basically, Michael wrote a script and we recorded it. You'll see now it's kind of narrated by Michael as well. And here it is after about 2 years on and off of work. We're very excited to share it with you. I should also note that in addition to the fact that this kind of the inception of this video came from a Hampshire College connection, it was also animated by a Hampshire College alum, Owen Newberger, who is a fantastic animator. He animated several of the Security in Context videos, which people can access. After this show, the video will kind of be publicly available on securityincontext.org or through our YouTube channel, and I'm sure Jadaliyya will link to it as well. So what we'll do now is, without further introduction, go ahead and play the video, and we'll come back and talk about it. So Bassam, whenever you're ready, if you can go ahead and launch it, that would be great.
All right, folks. So this video is about 10 minutes long, and we are going right to it.
The U.S. national security establishment, also called the national security state and the U.S. war machine, is the richest and most powerful organization on earth. The Department of Defense alone, just one component of this mammoth enterprise, oversees the U.S. armed forces, fields 1.4 million uniformed military personnel, employs 950,000 civilian workers, and spends over $850 billion per year, more than the amount devoted to defense by the next 9 countries combined. It also maintains the largest network of military bases in the world, with major installations in Europe, Turkey, Japan, South Korea, the Caribbean, and the Persian Gulf area. Because of its size, wealth, and influence, the U.S. war machine exerts a vastly disproportionate influence on the fate of the planet and its human inhabitants. In addition to the DoD, this giant enterprise consists of several major subsystems, each with its own institutional priorities, but all collaborating with each other and jointly committed to ensure the enduring power and wealth of the national security establishment. Within this giant structure, only the president and members of Congress are elected. Every other key figure is either appointed by the president or serves as an official of major arms-making companies, think tanks, or major media conglomerates. But even though the decisions they make have the power to shape U.S. and global societies, this system largely functions without public input and with very little transparency or public accountability. The president occupies the dominant position in this system as head of the executive branch of government and as commander-in-chief, in which capacity he or she is responsible for all key decisions regarding the use of military force. The National Security Council, operating out of the White House, formulates policy options for the president and communicates presidential decisions to the Secretaries of Defense and State, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and other top government officials. The next most powerful entity is the U.S. military establishment, which includes the Department of Defense, the Armed Forces, and other key agencies. Significant power is also wielded by the commanders of the Pentagon's regional commands, including the European Command, the Central Command, the Indo-Pacific Command, and the African Command. The foreign policy establishment, nicknamed the Blob by Washington pundits, includes the Department of State, as well as foreign policy experts in the media, elite universities, and the Washington think tank universe, many of whom are former State Department officials. These figures interact with each other on a regular basis and strive to reach consensus, whatever party their affiliation is. When they disagree, as occurred during the latest stages of the Vietnam War, political chaos is likely to occur and U.S. policy appears uncertain and contradictory. When they agree, as they do now about the need to curb China's rise, the gears of U.S. policy all move in unison. In order to retain their position within the foreign policy elite, members of the Blob never question core assumptions of U.S. foreign policy, such as Washington's right to dominate the global order and to intervene anywhere on the planet when vital U.S. interests are deemed to be at risk. Typically, disagreements only arise about the comparative effectiveness of various strategies to ensure continuing U.S. supremacy. Nestled between the military establishment and the foreign policy Blob are U.S. spy agencies, jointly called the intelligence community. One of these agencies, the Central Intelligence Agency, or CIA, also conducts covert military operations, usually in conjunction with the Pentagon Special Operations Command, or SOCOM. The defense industry, widely termed the military-industrial complex, is composed of the major arms-producing companies, called defense contractors because they depend on Pentagon contracts for a large share of their annual income. These companies wield enormous influence in Washington because they are major spenders and employers in key congressional districts and are among the leading donors to congressional campaigns. Lobbyists from these companies typically collaborate with Pentagon officials to lobby Congress for increased spending on major planes, tanks, ships, and other so-called big-ticket or high-cost items. These discussions are almost never visible to the public, and billion-dollar contracts are routinely awarded and renewed with bipartisan backing and very little meaningful deliberation, as compared to the highly visible and partisan debates on health and education spending bills. Congress plays a major role in the national security establishment because, under the Constitution, it must approve the annual budget for many of these agencies. Through its control of spending for foreign aid and military aid, Congress can also exert a degree of influence over U.S. relations with overseas allies. For example, strong congressional support for the State of Israel has ensured that Israel has been among the leading recipients of U.S. military aid over the past several decades. These various entities, when united as the national security establishment, share four abiding overarching objectives. First, self-preservation and advancement. The modern U.S. war machine was created during World War II to conduct the war with the Axis powers and was expanded after World War II to manage the Cold War with the Soviet Union. Ever since then, it has sought to perpetuate itself, both by inventing and exaggerating foreign threats, and also by creating a powerful ecosystem of domestic arms producers, security-related think tanks and research organizations, friendly media personalities, and pro-defense local and national officials. The second overarching objective is permanent global dominance. The U.S. emerged from the Cold War as the world's dominant power, and ever since, U.S. elites have been committed to preserving America's status as the world's dominant power and to preventing any other country from matching U.S. global sway or even to come within reaching distance of doing so. This outlook requires vast amounts of spending on advanced weaponry while preventing rival states, especially now China, from acquiring the technology to catch up with the U.S. in military capabilities. This outlook is hardwired into the thinking of U.S. political and military leaders. There is absolutely no dissent to the principle of permanent American paramountcy. Third, adherence to the American way of war, which rests on three basic components. These are the forward deployment of U.S. combat forces, with a bulk of U.S. forces stationed on the edge of enemy territory, not at barracks at home, and so position that, were a war to break out, it will be fought largely on or near the enemy's territory, not the U.S. homeland. Also, the employment of overwhelming firepower to subdue enemy forces. In any major military engagement, U.S. doctrine calls for the maximum concentration of firepower at the very onset of battle to ensure that U.S. forces overpower and demolish their enemy. Finally, the constant pursuit of technological superiority, also called technological overmatch. U.S. doctrine calls for constant investment in advanced technologies to ensure that U.S. forces are equipped with more capable weaponry than their opponents possess, and are able to use technological advantages, such as space systems and precision weaponry, to overcome an enemy's advantages in numbers. Together, these three propositions jointly constitute what U.S. leaders term the American way of war. And finally, the fourth overriding principle: adherence to the ideology of American exceptionalism. Whatever their differences over tactics or, say, organizational budget allotments, every senior member of the national security establishment professes allegiance to the bedrock principle that the United States has been chosen by the Judeo-Christian God and or by its impeccable values and status as the world's most powerful democracy to establish and protect a U.S.-dominated world order. This outlook is often expressed today as America's responsibility as the world's leading democracy to defend what's called the rules-abiding liberal world order against hostile, disruptive forces. However expressed, the underlying assumption is that the U.S. is uniquely positioned to employ force when required to preserve global order. As Secretary of State Madeleine Albright once stated, "If we have to use force, it is because we are America. We are the indispensable nation." These four enduring principles governed U.S. foreign policy and military policy during the Cold War period and have continued to shape U.S. policy ever since.
All right. Uh, we're back, I guess. That was
We are
really
back.
good. I'm very, very happy with how it turned out. Before I talk a little bit more about it, Michael, what do you think?
It's the graphics are fantastic. I did this with chalk the first couple of times, but this is much better. It really is. But I'm
Yes.
curious what people think, and I'm thinking, of course, I speak about the unity of this establishment, how it's going to fare, how this unity will fare, depending on the election outcome, and maybe we'll talk about that.
Well, we'll talk about that for sure. I think it's good to try to discuss it, and I wanted to kind of before that talk a little bit about kind of the process itself and the decisions that we made along the way, because I think part of the conversations we had was to kind of do a very basic introduction that's going to be widely used. And this was literally a teaching tool because it was from a lecture in the class. So, we really wanted something that is accessible, that kind of captures what you thought were the most important elements that needed to be said. And of course, it was really important for us that this reflected your vision, really, in terms of what you wanted to share. But what I really thought about the video that makes it special is that there's kind of two components of it, even though it's kind of 10 minutes, but there's the first part that kind of introduces your kind of the different components of what we can call the US war machine. And then in addition to that, there's the second section that talks about the objectives. And I think that's really powerful because it adds a lot of analytical dimensions that kind of people can unpack if they're trying to use this as a teaching tool. It's it stands on its own, but I think it also gives people various directions. So if people want to expand on the National Security Council and how there's a lot of discussions about how the National Security Council has increasingly played a outsized role over the years, for example. That's something they can kind of show the video and then kind of expand on that. If people want to talk about kind of ideological components and American exceptionalism, they can kind of unpack that too. So it provides lots of kind of starting points. And I wanted to kind of ask you, Michael, about kind of as you were, as we were working on this, what are the kind of main issues that you wanted to get across and the things that were on your mind that you felt needed to be there, perhaps, and maybe some of the things that you felt like you had to leave out because of, the space considerations and time considerations.
So yeah, so of course I now think of other things that should have been included, but I think we actually captured the main ingredients of the national security state are all there, and uh, I think that four principles that I discuss really are the dominant uh, principles that guide U.S. foreign policy. So I'm very pleased with the outcome. I don't think we've left important things out, although once people see it, we'll get feedback, and of course, people will identify things that we should have said. But I think the basic principles are there. Uh, and uh, People should understand that this derives from my work not only as an academic studying these matters, but also as an activist, as an advocate for peace and disarmament and low military spending over the years. For for decades I've been an advocate in Washington and getting to know these organizations that constitute the national security state. And when I got started, I had no clue how the government works. And it's my impression that very few people outside Washington understand this at all, the components of the national security state and how they interact with each other and who is involved. It's very obscured and purposely so. a lot of acronyms of agencies that people don't know what they do and where they're located. And so this is the result of years of trying to grasp how Washington works and where are the places that advocates, activists can apply pressure, should that be their objective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you. Very few people know how it works. And the more people know how it works and how it's working, the more they're scared from its consequences. And I think this is something you've been trying to get across in your work, whether it's in your books or whether it's in your kind of kind of public policy articles and various op-eds, and also kind of the activist work that you've done. And I think this is something that the video brings attention to very clearly, especially as we move into a world with challenges to U.S. policy and the U.S. kind of not letting go of its desire and unending quest for primacy and supremacy, which itself is a driver of conflict worldwide, in a sense that the distinction between, or the divergence between, this quest and kind of the increasing reality. Um, yeah, but Sam, do you have any comments or questions about this, or any thoughts?
I actually have a lot of thoughts, but I'm conscious of the fact that we have an hour. So I'll ask one question that uh, lingers in maybe in the minds of so many right now, and that is, um, considering the United States is basically undergoing various domestic changes, and the global state system is also undergoing changes, including a move towards multipolarity. And I say towards because no one knows exactly where we're at, unless I'm missing something. But it's moving in that direction. How does this variance in U.S. power, not in absolute terms, but in relative terms to other powerful states, how does this variance affect the mechanics and machinations of and dynamics of what you presented?
Uh, what I had a flash when you were speaking just now is the degree to which the U.S. Relies on the dominance of military power to project its interests. And I was thinking how much the model that we see of Israel right now in the Middle East, of pushing diplomacy aside and relying on sheer military might to accomplish its objectives, and having invested billions of dollars to build up a powerful military force. Now, the Israeli military force is really an extension of the American military because it's financed by the US for the most part and supplied by the US. And I think what you see with Israel reflects the way in which the US establishment believes, which is that so long as the United States has a dominant military capacity, it has the upper hand. Of course, it has to use that force, it has to demonstrate the force for that to be effective. So the question, I could go on, but the U.S. is now spending, 5 times as much as China on research and development, and 10 times as much as Russia, to ensure that it will always have superior weaponry versus those countries. And this is what the leadership believes is necessary to ensure permanent U.S. dominance. But at some point you have to demonstrate your ability, willingness, will to use that. So the question is, when and where might the U.S. be provoked or find the occasion to use this power?
And I think Thank you, Michael. That's great to kind of help us conceptualize what Bassam was asking. And I think in the video there's the when we talk about the question of the American way of war and technological overmatch,
Yes,
there's both what you said. There's both the uh, endless kind of spending on weapons and new technologies, but also increasingly it's manifesting itself in blocking, uh, other countries, especially China, of getting those technologies. And so the
that's right.
use of economic sanctions and economic warfare and kind of basically trying to block countries from accessing or acquiring certain technologies. And those
Mhm.
tools, both of those tools are being used in a way. So it's kind of captured in that aspect of the video.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to actually unpack in the video, and we don't have time to go into all of those different issues. And I thought we could transition into a little bit more of a discussion that goes beyond the video and talk about foreign policy more broadly. And even there, of course, there's a lot to say and there's a lot to discuss. But having read Michael's work over the years, I thought we could focus on a few topics. I have three in mind, and maybe more will come up depending on how much time we have. And basically, uh, have a discussion with Michael about what you think are the main issues at stakes under those three broad themes or topic, which I think are existential for human societies globally, and which, regardless of who gets elected, seem to be things that are on their way, given the path dependence and given the momentum uh, that really need to be changed. But I don't see that change necessarily coming, um, at least not dramatically, regardless of who wins the election. Although maybe you'll disagree with that. And the three topics I thought we could discuss. One is something that is no longer widely discussed, which is nuclear weapons and nuclear technology, and the threat of
Yes.
nuclear war. And the second is climate change, and the third is automated weapons and artificial intelligence. And of course, all of these are very, very big issues. But let's start with nuclear war. And I was actually talking to a colleague of mine, also at Hampshire, Professor Salman Hamid, and he alerted me to a series in the New York Times recently, which is uh, shedding light on U.S. massive investments in nuclear weapons over the coming years. Could you tell us a little bit about kind of the threats that are at stake with respect to nuclear weapons, and where we seem to be heading and the dangers on that
Yeah.
specifically?
So, Omar, that's one area where I wish uh, I had said more in the video. There is a place in the video that talks about the nuclear establishment, but I never did. It's just there on the chart. The nuclear weapons establishment is mentioned. I wish we had said more about that because the nuclear weapons establishment has enormous influence
Hello?
in Washington. And this, again, is a case where there is no dissent. There's virtually no dissent. And the belief is that the United States must have the ability to uh, either wage a nuclear war if called upon to do so, and
Hello?
to destroy any enemy, and to be able to do that even
Hello?
if attacked, to survive an attack and to destroy the attacker utterly. And this is unchallenged. And it also is believed that this requires multiple uh, systems, delivery systems, to accomplish that. And we could have said that, there are three delivery systems: land based ICBMs, sea based ICBMs, and, and bomber delivered weapons. Now, all of these are currently being replaced at the cost of $1.5 trillion. Every one of them. There's a new bomber, the B 21, under construction, a new ballistic missile system called Sentinel under construction, and a new submarine that's under construction at enormous expense. Meanwhile, China and Russia are also modernizing their nuclear facilities. So maybe I'm saying more than necessary, but there's essentially a new nuclear arms race underway, much like we had in the Cold War period. And in that time there was huge opposition to acquiring these additional weapons, and you don't see that today. So on one hand, we're going about our business, but the nuclear stockpiles are getting larger and more dangerous. And we have, in addition, a greater propensity to threaten the use of nuclear weapons, mostly by Vladimir Putin threatening to use them over Ukraine. But both China and the United States are girding up for a war over Taiwan, which almost assuredly would become a nuclear war because that's the only plausible outcome of a US China war. So we're moving into a period where nuclear weapons are becoming far more important and at risk than they have been since the 1960s and 70s. And yet there's very little opposition or attention to this. So I'm glad you asked this question, Omar. Oh, I can't hear you.
It's because I muted myself,
Yeah,
but I'm back. Thank you for that. And I think this is the striking thing about this topic is that unlike the next topic, which I'm going to ask you about, climate change, which is on everyone's minds and widely discussed, even if not enough is done about it, and we'll talk about that. But it's at least something on most people's mind, whereas this is something that is thought of. This was a problem in the Cold War era, and it's no longer the case. But that's not the case. That's something that we should still be, at the forefront of kind of our minds. In this series published by the New York Times, there was a mind-boggling statistic that the projected expenditures over the next 30 years can average $108,000 per minute that the U.S. is going to be spending over the next 30 years, which is just incredible amount just on its, as you mentioned, this nuclear arsenal modernization. But I wanted to, shift to another topic because you mentioned the confrontation with China. We talk about it in the video. You mentioned it in terms of this kind of nuclear buildup. But you wrote a book called All Hell Breaking Loose, or All Hell Breaks Loose, if I'm remembering the title correctly, which was, I think, a quote from the US military, if I'm not mistaken, about the dangers of climate change. And I've heard you talk about in various lectures why this confrontation with China is undermining the global efforts at addressing climate change. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe kind of where things seem to be heading on that front from your perspective?
sure. There's a lot to be said about that, and I'm glad you ask about this. When we talk about China, the U.S. and China together are responsible for something like 40% of the greenhouse gases that are responsible for climate change. So, unless those two countries are working seriously to reduce their emissions, it's going to be very hard for the rest of the world, 60% of the rest of the world. The good countries like Denmark and the Netherlands, bless their heart, are doing a lot to reduce their emissions, but it's not going to make a difference. The US and China are the big emitters, and they're the ones, with India coming up as the third biggest. So, unless China and the US work on reducing their emissions, there's no chance of slowing climate change. So, that's fact number one. Fact number two is unless the US and China collaborate and work together, uh, and have a shared policy of collaborating on climate change negotiations, the talks are the kind of global climate negotiations will go nowhere. You have to have the major powers working together. That occurred in 2015 when President Obama and President Xi agreed jointly to support and both spoke at the Paris Paris Climate Conference in 2015 that led to the Paris Climate Agreement. But since then, cooperation has broken down because of the hostility between the two countries. So, for example, this month, already November, there will be another meeting of the parties of the climate treaty in Azerbaijan. And President Biden isn't going, and President Xi isn't going. And without their support, there will be no significant progress. So, really, this animosity between the US and China, which feeds this militaristic buildup, is preventing us from ever solving the climate change danger. There's more to be said about it, but that's in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, that's very helpful, and I think this is kind of another aspect of why this consensus on confronting China in DC that's become taken as fact, unchallenged, really, and there's kind of alternating between the extreme hawkish position and the moderately hawkish position, uh, at least what I can see, in terms of who can outdo the other, and this is one thing where I felt that the Biden administration's policies were a continuation of the Trump policies in some ways that did not reverse, particularly the aspect of economic sanctions and kind of blocking the technologies that China is trying to acquire. And I lost you there, Michael, for a second. Are you still there? Michael seems to have gone off air, and he's coming back. There he is. I can't hear you. Can you hear me? I can't. We can't hear you, I think.
Michael, you're on mute.
Can you hear me
Yep,
now?
we're good.
Perfect.
I'm
Um,
sorry.
no, that's perfectly fine. The third topic I wanted to ask you about, and you're right, there's so much to really go into in terms of more details about these, but this is just as scary, and also something that maybe the general public is starting to hear more about, but I don't think are aware of quite how extensive these technologies are becoming and how much they factor into the thinking of the US military and perhaps other countries as well, which is automated weapons and kind of the role of artificial intelligence and automated weapons. I don't know if we should group them together, but in my mind, they're grouped together. New technologies, new types of weapons, new types of warfare. And in the last few years, I know you've been researching this quite a bit and are writing something about it, as right now. So, given that this is something that people may not know about, can you briefly introduce what it is and how big it's becoming within the thinking of the U.S. military?
Oh, well, this is now hardwired into U.S. military thinking, and it goes back to a decision in 2018. This was during the Trump administration to switch the basis of U.S. military strategy from a counterterror strategy, which prevailed from 2001 to 2018. The U.S. military was focused largely on counterterrorism, counterinsurgency. 2018, the Department of Defense said, that's we're putting that aside now. From now on, the defining feature of U.S. strategy is what they call great power competition, strategic competition with what they call peer near peer competitors. and that's China and Russia. Those are the only countries that come close to the US in military capabilities. So since 2018, the military has been geared up exclusively to go to war with China or Russia. I mean, they may do other things, but the equipment, the training, the organization is all intended for a major, what they call a high end fight, a high intensity conflict with the armed forces of Russia or China, which and U.S. strategists believe that for to prevail, for the U.S. forces to prevail, to win, they have to have technological overmatch over Russian and Chinese forces. Remember, these conflicts are assumed to take place, as the video says. They're not in the on American borders. They're not anywhere close. They're on the borders of Russia and China, is where they assume these conflicts will occur, where Russia and China, in that case, would have the advantage of the fighting for their homelands and will have advantages in numbers. So to overcome Russia and China, the US must have technological overmatch, technological superiority to wipe out any manpower or other advantages Russia and China might have. And that has become specifically, that technological overmatch is specifically come to mean autonomous weapons and robotic weapons, which could be produced in huge quantities and perform in all kinds of miraculous ways. So it is claimed. So the uh, Biden administration has announced a project called Replicator. And the purpose of Replicator is to rapidly produce and deploy in the tens of thousands, that's the number they use, tens of thousands of autonomous weapon systems to be used in a war against Russia or China. Autonomous or unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, autonomous surface vehicles, USVs, ships, or robotic ships, robotic submarines, and robotic tanks. All of these are now in the development stage. Prototypes have been made, and the plan is in the years ahead is to mass produce these systems and set them loose with computers making the decisions on how they will operate.
Wow. So that's really the stuff of nightmares, and uh, taking us to another level in terms of the threats of conflicts happening, especially given the um, lots of possibilities of as you talk about in your writings, errors and kind of taking the
Yeah,
decision making even more out of human hands. Not that that itself is essentially a guarantee for no warfare, but increasing the chances as well. So I remembered, Michael, another topic that I wanted to talk to you about, even though again there's more to really discuss in all of those. But this is something that came out of conversations you and I have had, and a worry that you've had in terms of moving forward, what could happen in the United States, which is that you've researched the role of the U.S. Army abroad. But one of the things that are possibilities, especially that's something raised by the Trump campaign, is using the army for domestic repression.
yeah.
And as we're thinking about the elections tomorrow, I wanted to give you a chance to kind of share some of your thoughts or your concerns about this, and how serious you think it can be. What are the prospects? Whether this is something that might actually realistically come to pass in terms of actually kind of mobilizing or using the army to kind of repress domestic dissent. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's something I worry about a great deal. This is could prove to be one of the most significant questions in American democratic history. depending on the outcome of the election. If Donald Trump becomes president, he has threatened to use the military for domestic purposes. Now, he threatened to do that before when he was president during the initial Black Lives Matters protests that many of us are familiar with. When these protests occurred in American cities, Trump asked his senior military officials, General Milley, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Mark Esper, the Secretary of Defense, to deploy active duty troops, not the National Guard, but active duty soldiers, to deploy them in American cities with orders to shoot to kill, if necessary, protesters. And the senior military leadership refused and said that's not our constitutional responsibility to do that. But I worry that if he becomes president, he has specifically threatened that this time around, he will insist and as commander in chief, order them and he will fire anybody who disagrees with him. He will order them to deploy troops in American cities to suppress protesters. And he has also, as we all know, threatened to round up undocumented persons in the United States and have them expelled in the millions of people. And that will require, as people around him have suggested, using the military for this purpose, which would be something that's never happened in American history before. So I don't know how the military will respond to that. It will create a crisis because, as we've discussed, they believe that their job is to be forward deployed in Asia and Europe to fight Russia and China, not to engage in domestic political operations. That's not the way they see their duty historically. So there could be an unprecedented crisis in the military establishment that we've talked about if they're ordered by a Trump president to engage in these kind of domestic operations. And the question is, will they obey or disobey, or will there be mutinies? There certainly will be chaos.
Wow. Well, we've tried to take people's minds off the stress of the election by putting even more scary topics on the table for discussion, which basically indicate that people, regardless of who wins, there are bigger topics that we need to be focusing on and working to prevent anyway. And I think that's important to remember, given the really what's at stake globally. And I'd really like to thank you, Michael, for coming on today and talking with us about this. Of course, for all the collaboration that we did on the video, which I'm very, very happy is now kind of out there in the world, and people, like I said, can check it out. I'm sure Jadaliyya will link to it, or you can check it out on our website, securityincontext.org, and our YouTube channel. I'm very excited to see it distributed and used as a kind of a teaching resource. And thank you, Bassam, for hosting us to kind of premiere it and share this discussion with everyone.
Yeah, Omar. One thing, I prepared a list of a kind of bibliography or a list of sources for that to support the video. Could that be made available to people who want to say, "Oh, Professor Klare, where did all this come from?" And there is a literature that undergirds this
Absolutely.
narration.
Absolutely. We'll add it to the video, which will have a special place on the website that people can access the bibliography. And also, whenever people link through it, they can see it in the description of the video and also on our website as well. So
Great.
that it'll be great to have those available. Absolutely. Thank you. Bassam, thank you for having
I
us.
You want to mention, Omar, the subtitles in different languages?
Yes, I forgot to mention that. Thank you for letting me, reminding me. So through the settings function on the video, the translation is available on Spanish and Arabic subtitles. Also, English subtitles are available. So people want to share it in those languages, and we're going to be adding more languages as well. But for now, you can also see it in Arabic and Spanish.
And thank you, Omar. And I also added the link to the YouTube version of the video in case you would like to see it. And on the YouTube version, you can actually select any language you'd like to, or the available languages that in which you'd like to see the subtitles. And the link is bit.ly, which is the URL shortening website slash 3AAQFDD. It's on the screen. You can, pause it, watch it again later, and take it down. And we also will be adding all of this information on the post on Jadaliyya, on jadaliyya.com. So you will be able to get to it at any point as you wish.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. Uh,
And thank you.
we hope to speak with you again in more detail after the civil war. Sorry, after the elections, and we will be tuning in and sharing your video and explainer with students. This is certainly one of the things what one can do in response to questions regarding, okay, so what is the alternative? How do we actually have a different interpretation or a different lens or a different way or a different approach of looking at things? So we are very 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 much appreciative of this work, and of course to the work of this of security and context. We will see you again soon. Thank you, Omar. Thanks, Michael, and stay safe.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Bye bye.